historical disgrace, says Israel. We strongly condemn this move, says Hamas. Now, those are the reactions then from both sides as they rejected moves to arrest their leaders for war crimes. The International Criminal Court's prosecutor, Karim Khan, saying Israel has committed crimes against humanity and that Hamas bears criminal responsibility for actions committed during the October the 7th attack, including taking hostages, rape and torture. Khan also saying no foot soldier, no commander, no civilian leader, no one can act with impunity. Well, first of all, let's hear from Benjamin Netanyahu.
The outrageous decision by the ICC prosecutor, Karim Khan, to seek arrest warrants against the democratically elected leaders of Israel is a moral outrage of historic proportions. It will cast an everlasting mark of shame on the International Court.
Well, International Affairs Editor Kethevane Gorjestani is joining me here on set. Kethevane, there's been a lot of reaction to this, a lot of it very pointed, very strong reaction.
Yes, and one interesting thing is that the leaders of Israel and Hamas actually agreed on one thing, agreed on condemning and slamming the sort of equation between Israel and Hamas. For Netanyahu, he called it disgusting to compare the democratic Israel and the mass murderers of Hamas. In a statement, Hamas slammed the fact of equating the victim and the executioner. And this question of equivalence was also raised by Germany that criticized the simultaneous application that gives a false impression of equivalence. Of course, the Americans were very clear about that to Joe Biden in his statement, saying whatever this prosecutor might imply, there is no equivalence, none between Israel and Hamas. Interesting to mention, though, that within the United States and within Joe Biden's Democratic Party, there are some people who are welcoming this move by the prosecutor of the ICC, including the Senator Bernie Sanders, who's a Jewish senator, but a strong critic of Israel. He welcomed this move. He said that the ICC prosecutor was right. And he said, whether it's Putin's war crimes in Ukraine, Hamas's barbaric terrorism in Israel, or Netanyahu's use of starvation as a weapon of war, no one is above the law. There were some other countries that welcomed this move, like South Africa, that is currently leading a case of genocide against Israel, this time in the International Court of Justice. And then there was the reaction, the statement by the French that was sort of a balancing act. France stating that it supports the ICC, it supports its independence and its investigation, but it stopped short of saying that the ICC prosecutor was right to request those warrants. It did, however, said that it has already condemned many times terrorist attacks by Hamas, and also said that it had repeatedly warned Israel of the need for compliance with international law. So a wide array of reactions to this decision by the prosecutor of the ICC.
As you said, the warrants have been requested, but they haven't been issued yet, have they? So what happens next in this process?
Exactly. Now, this is really the time when they're going to decide. There's going to be a three-judge panel that is going to review the evidence proposed by the prosecution and decide whether there are reasonable grounds to issue these warrants. This could take several months, and this panel can actually decide to sort of pick and choose. It doesn't necessarily have to grant the arrest warrants on all the charges presented by the prosecutor. It could decide on portions of the charges, and if they do issue those arrest warrants, then all the member states to the ICC technically would have to arrest any of these five men if they came on their soil and hand them over to the International Criminal Court. The only problem is the enforcement. The ICC has to count on the goodwill of those countries to actually go ahead with that, because the penalty for a country for not arresting someone who has an arrest warrant against them is basically a referral back to the ICC, which can then refer you to the UN Security Council. But basically, it would be simply a slap on the wrist if a country didn't follow that arrest warrant.
Yeah, you mentioned enforcement. I mean, what could be the potential consequences, I suppose, of all of this?
Well, the UK, for example, pointed to the fact that Israel was not a member of the ICC, and that starts showing a little bit of the problem. Israel doesn't recognize it. The US is not not a member of the ICC. Qatar is not a member of the ICC. So these men likely won't face a prosecution, but it could make it a little bit harder for them to travel. For example, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, he's technically based in Qatar, which is not a member of the ICC, but he does travel within the region, and some of these countries might be members of the ICC and therefore would have to make a choice whether or not to invite him and have him on their soil. Same goes for Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu, of course, if he goes to the United States, the U.S. is not a member and will likely not arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. But he does put, for example, European countries like France in a very difficult diplomatic position, which is, if he does come for whatever reason, do they arrest him, or do they go against the International Criminal Court that they consider and they have supported in its independence? So it really might, in a way, symbolically a little bit isolate these leaders, especially the leaders of Israel, who tend to travel more than the leaders of Hamas, obviously. So concretely, it won't block Benjamin Netanyahu from traveling the world, but it could make it a little bit more difficult, further isolate him on the world stage. And you could a little bit start comparing it to the most recent example we have, which is Vladimir Putin, who has an arrest warrant from last year. He is still traveling, but he's not traveling exactly to all the places that he went. We saw him in China, which is also not a member of the ICC. So it's not going to change much, but it is symbolically very important if those arrest warrants end up being granted, whoever they are on.
Kethevane, thanks very much. Kethevane Gorjestani.